Hi, Misty. So you ask a good question, namely, what am I looking for in your long paper? Well, which isn't due for quite a while, so there'll be more coming up that specifies what the paper is about, especially after the midterm is when I'm going to really start to go over it. So in a certain way, I would say not to worry about it too much, except that I'd like you at this point to really start to begin thinking about what you like to write about. And the reason I say that is because oftentimes the best papers are the papers that people actually have an interest in writing. So even though I do, and I will after the midterm provide you with a list of prompts that you can choose from, I actually prefer students, if possible, to generate a topic on their own that they'd like to write about. That you will then go through and do a lot of research on, basically. And you'll see there's a research exercise that'll come up much later. But the idea is really what the paper is, because there's these two shorter papers, and those are sort of where you're kind of just responding and thinking through some ideas. But the longer paper effectively should be a sort of place or space where I want you to really think through in detail a topic, as well as incorporating and thinking through what other philosophers have talked about. So, for instance, it's hard to talk about in a certain way without an example. So let me give you an example here. Let's say you wanted to write about, when we get there, you want to write about the mind-body problem, dualism, for instance. And there's a debate there. And it's always good in any paper, but particularly this paper, since it's a philosophy paper, to find a sort of debate or tension around which you can talk about. So, for instance, in the mind-body problem, one of the questions is there really a distinction between the mind and the body? And we'll come to that later. So it's kind of, you probably aren't familiar at this point about that debate, but we're going to cover it at some point, not too much further, a few weeks from now. And so one of the questions would sort of think of it through is, well, for instance, Descartes argues that there is a distinction, a qualitative distinction between the mind and the body, whereas, for instance, someone like Gilbert Ryle would argue that it's actually a category mistake, and that in truth the mind and the body are actually the same. And so, for instance, what you'd have to do is sort of lay out the debate and talk about what Gilbert Ryle, for instance, or Descartes thought, and then also go even a little bit further and think and do some research and find out what other philosophers have said about the debate and incorporate that in. Ultimately, it's not just simply a review of a philosophical debate. That's not the point of the paper. The point is for you to really express, as an argument, your own personal view. But do that, express your view in view and with or through the research you actually do. So it's a research paper in that sense. But I will be providing some examples. I don't have any to post at this point, but pretty much after the midterm I'll provide you with some examples of some good stellar papers that I think would help you. Also take a look at in your textbook. There's a great essay right at the beginning called How to Write a Philosophy Paper. Read that. And so I hope that sort of answers your question. I know it's sort of a brief response, but it should help you get a sense of what I'm after. Ultimately, what I want to see is critical thinking as well as research. So, that's sort of the two criteria I use to grade these papers. As on the one hand, I want to see that you actually, through research, are able to develop a fuller understanding of a topic than we're actually able to cover in class. But moreover, I want to see that you can actually think through and argue a philosophical thesis from your own perspective. That doesn't mean, for instance, that you have to say something that's insanely original, but just the idea that you should develop your own views, and I want to see you doing that. That's one of our course objectives, actually, is namely that you do develop your own critical personal philosophy. So the paper helps me do that. Okay? I hope that if you have more questions, ask, or I would just say wait until after the midterm, which I'll discuss in more detail. But if you want it, at this point, just start thinking about the topics that really interest you. Because again, the papers that are good are the ones that are interesting to the authors. If you pick a topic that's boring, well, chances are it's going to be boring to read. So, okay, I hope that helps. I'll talk to you later, Miss G. Bye.